The fun thing about the internet is that people will tell you you're wrong without hesitation, and sometimes, in a grand while, tell you specifically how. I encourage this because if I am wrong, I'd like to be correcting myself. Now, my initial reading is early writings by Penguin Classics. Reading Marx, it's important to look up Hegel. I've not read him personally. But so far as I can understand him, his assertion is that our consciousness is not independent of objective reality. Whereas previous philosophers, such as Kant, believed that there was an abstract and ultimately unknowable world outside of our experience, Hegel thought an unnecessary distinction had been made. Hegel doesn't view consciousness as a sovereign entity, but rather breaks down consciousness into three parts: a notion, its antithesis, and a synthesis of the two. Through this comparison and contrast is how understanding, according to Hegel, works. Nothing can be understood in and of itself. Once a synthesis has been reached, this will restart the process, because once you understand a concept, you create an antithesis to that concept as you did initially to arrive at that concept. As consciousness develops, more concepts are created and integrated into an ever greater understanding. Not only that, but Hegel thought this process could be observed in political institutions, the state, and the important individuals of society. That every age is an improvement on the one that came before. For Marx, however, Hegel made a mistake in claiming the physical manifestation of consciousness is found in the political institutions, which themselves could be corrupted by greed and avarice, and especially when they are wrapped up in a single individual. An interesting transition occurs when Marx is criticizing monarchy and brings up primogeniture, that is, land ownership. Just as a king has no inherent right to the throne as a result of his birth, neither does the son of a landowner have a right to inherit that land. Land is assumed to be, in the present day, to be earned, but of course land is not created. It's either stolen, inherited from somebody who stole it, or arbitrarily kept from others. Marx, in criticizing the state as a manifestation of consciousness, also argues it's only partial, and will always be corrupt insofar as it excludes other members of society. This, I imagine, creates a problem for authoritarian communists, since they exclude parties which aren't supposedly communist. Therefore, according to Marx, insofar as I've read, he would call the modern day so-called communist states insufficient. Not that I read Marx religiously. In my reading of him, I feel free to accept some things and reject others. Unless two ideas are part of a continuum, you can do this. Now, other philosophers in history, such as the Arabic philosopher Ibn Khaldun, recognize that governments being made up of men inevitably become corrupt, and under democracy, people who had been outside the government were given some control. Marx's attack on primogeniture is a foreshadowing of his attack on the landed class and private property in general. And property is a vestige of the tyrannical monarchies that preceded the capitalist democracies which replaced them. Hegel also believed that the result of history is a perfect understanding of the preceding parts, and that each previous stage, one of which we're currently in, represents an inadequate understanding of the world and therefore requires further gestation. Marx, being a materialist, believes that the development of humanity is something that can be observed as well, but not in institutions and certainly not in individuals, but rather in classes, the haves and the have-nots. Marx believed in a periodic zeitgeist like Hegel. But whereas Hegel thought people created the zeitgeist, Marx saw it as a result of class conflict. In sum, people are the products of history. Marx lived at a time when Germany was going through revolution. Democracy had spread from England to France and now was penetrating Central Europe. Marx was rather optimistic about the conclusion of the conflict happening in Germany. An interesting dynamic during this conflict, which he wrote about, was the Jewish question. It's a problem we still face today with other groups, which Jewish people faced back then. That is, the Jews were seeking religious tolerance, and a response made was that German Gentiles were not yet free. Therefore, what right had the Jews to complain? I challenge anyone not to hear echoes of current conversation regarding black people's rights or trans rights and those who reduce all problems to class. Marx detests religion, but believes in religious freedom and uses the United States as his example of an ideal state in this regard. Since Germany is a Christian state, it threatens the Jewish religion with extinction. The Jewish people might be wrong, but it is not the state which has the right to eliminate it. That is something that must be done through science and reason and argument. Yes, there must be freedom in Germany for the Gentile, but also freedom for the Jew. These two things are not mutually exclusive. Just as the German Gentile has a right to demand freedom, so do the Jewish people. If the Jews must postpone their demands for freedom, why not the German Gentile? Because black and trans people face peculiar oppression aside from poverty, this rebuttal can be used as well in today's situations. Last thing I'll end here is the alienation that credit and money brings. In initial bartering and trade, your relationship with another individual ends once that transaction ends. You are free as a person once you get what you want. It's by no means a perfect system. If I don't have anything you want, I'm screwed. However, with a universal currency like paper money, I can now buy whatever I want, unless I don't have enough. Enter the creation of credit. What Marx recognized was that money and credit made a person increasingly dependent. I'm sure I've missed something in my initial reading of Marx. There are many interesting ideas here, although hidden behind sometimes a dense text and highfalutin words. It's sad because I think that's what's kept communism from being transmissible, but that's where I find my purpose, taking the esoteric and translating it into layman's terms. The world isn't as literate as it used to be. We are becoming increasingly an oral culture, but oral tradition is perfectly fine. It's how society existed prior to the written word. But I don't think the written word is going extinct just yet. People who read have certain advantages over people who obtain information by word of mouth. I'll probably do a video at some point on that subject. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed what you heard, please think about liking and subscribing.